Salut, film fans. A little crime thriller with political undertones, all in a tight little package that presages the coming of one of cinema's greatest eras. Let's talk about the 1958 film Ascenseur pour l'échafaud, otherwise known as Elevator to the Gallows, in this episode of What Makes This Film Great. Hey film fans, just a reminder that I'm now on Patreon, and if you want to support the channel a little bit further, head on over there and throw me a couple of ducats. Not only can you help the channel out, but you can also find new content which I'm uploading every week, including my new The Week in Movies series, which started about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and which I post every Friday, where I talk about developments in the business, with performers, with directors, whatever happened that week, and however I might want to riff on it. The link's in the description, and I'd love if you'd help me out. Thanks. Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode in a 6-part series I'm just calling The French Spring. I've had a few different of my followers suggest French films, so I thought, why not do a kind of a series where I talk about some of the films that I've loved, but also some that I hadn't seen yet that I wanted to kind of force myself to watch. So that's what we're going to get over the next few episodes of What Makes This Film Great. Plus I'm going to throw in a couple episodes of Break the Scene to touch on famous scenes from French films as well. A couple of caveats before we get into it. First of all, my French pronunciation is atrocious, if you couldn't tell from the top. When I speak with my friend Guillaume and I try to speak French, he's like, "It is okay, Aaron, we can speak English." To be fair, he speaks English, whereas I just go, So I will try on occasion to offer French pronunciation, but it's not going to be pretty. Apologies in advance. Second, and related, is that I am not a French film scholar. You can't go through the sort of academic process of getting a PhD in film without spending quite a bit of time with French cinema. It's one of the kind of pillars of world cinema from the very beginning all the way up through today. It's an immense world of cinema. So of course, I've watched a lot of French films. I have a pretty good working knowledge of, the first century or so of French cinema. But I'm not an expert. It's not my area of study. So if I get things wrong, if I leave things out, just telling you in advance, there's a pretty good likelihood that's going to happen. Drop a comment, let me know, expand on what you want to expand on. If I don't mention an actor who's actually a really famous French actor or a famous French character actor or something like that, yeah, let us know. I'm sure everybody watching these videos would love more information in the comments. With that being said, let's get into Louis Malle. Ascenseur pour l'échafaud, and that's the last time I'm going to try the French title, which is often called Elevator to the Gallows, although I've also seen it referred to as scaffolding to the gallows before. Elevator or lift makes more sense, as you'll see in the context of the film. It's the first feature film directed by Louis Malle, who had experience with shorts and also, probably most famously, documentaries, including some of the work he did with the famed kind of aquatic biologist Jacques Cousteau. It was written by Malle and Roger Nimier, based on the novel by Noël Cauleff, and it features cinematography by Henri Decaille, again, as I said. And Decaille is a very important figure in French cinema, including, but not only, French New Wave. A lot of times when we talk about French New Wave, the cinematographer who comes up is Raoul Coutard, and he should be, and he'll come up again in this series. But Decaille is also very important. He started working in the 50s, and he worked with a lot of the kind of progenitors of the New Wave, including Louis Malle, but also Jean-Pierre Melville. And he would also go on to work with like sort of standard New Wave directors like Chabrol and others in the 60s and later. And the cinematography in this film is quite good. This is a low-budget film, like a lot of early New Wave films were. And I'm not saying Elevator to the Gallows is a New Wave film. It's kind of a progenitor to the New Wave. We'll get into that in a second. But it shares a lot of that kind of low-budget, guerrilla-style filmmaking with the New Wave films that would start to come out in the following year. The cast includes a very famous performance by Jeanne Moreau, the great French actor who, this is probably in a way her first great film role, although she'd been making films for many years and had established herself as a very important presence in the French theater. This film, for reasons we'll get into, really put her on the map of French cinema. It also features Maurice Ronet, Georges Pujuy, and Yori Bertin as the sort of four main characters, and then there's a few very important sort of secondary characters, the police, the boss, and so on. It's a very simple, very tight little crime film with political undertones. Not a ton happens, as seems to be the case in a lot of the films I talk about on this channel, but the film's atmosphere, its presentation of its atmosphere, its very tight and focused plotting, and the performances throughout the film from all the players work together to provide, 90 minutes of just really exciting, thrilling, new filmmaking. The plot's very simple. Moreau and Ronet play lovers. Ronet's boss, Monsieur Carolla, is the head of this kind of multinational corporation that seems to have some shady stuff going on, definitely arms dealing, and it has benefited immensely from the post-Second World War economic growth in Europe, but also France's continued colonial adventures, to put it very euphemistically. And Ronet, as Julien Tavernier, works for him. Julien is a veteran. We definitely know that he's been in Indochina or Vietnam, and perhaps in Algeria as well. And he's having an affair with Carolla's wife, Florence. And in the very opening scene, which we'll have a look at in a moment, they are plotting the murder of Monsieur Carolla. And the film is a simple, perfect plan gone wrong film. Julien has this great plan. He's going to murder Monsieur Carolla, and then together they're going to live happily ever after. But if something can go wrong, it does go wrong. And it's a film that depends on bad choices, mistakes, coincidences, and simple, some might say today, predictable twists. And as I've been reading about it, it's a film that modern viewers complain about a little bit, in the sense that that would never happen, or that couldn't happen, or why would they do that? They wouldn't do that. And there's some truth to that, and I'll look at one kind of glaring example of that would probably never happen, which isn't that important narratively, but maybe thematically. But a lot of the things that happen that viewers today say wouldn't happen might not happen today, but would have been very likely to happen not only in the late 50s, but I think in the 70s and into the 80s. The sharing of information, the trusting of strangers, and so on. So if you can kind of watch this in the context of its time, and if you can accept that for the purposes of plotting, there are going to be a few coincidences, then you're in for a crackerjack little film. Julien's plot to murder Monsieur Carolla is quite simple, also probably a little bit ludicrous in this day and age, and perfectly planned out. They're working late on a Saturday. Everyone's left the building except for Julien, Monsieur Carolla, a secretary, and the security guard. The secretary and the security guard, it's made clear to us early on, know Julien, they like him. The security guard is very sort of worshipful of Julien's military experience, and so they have no reason to suspect him of anything. Monsieur Carolla is about to leave for a business trip. They know that, but it's also made clear to us that he also leaves without saying goodbye. So his absence wouldn't be a surprise. He has this office that has a series of doors that lock, so there's no reason that there would be any intrusion onto him from the hallway. Julien goes into his office, locks the door, and then the slightly ludicrous but also kind of awesome part is that he goes out onto his balcony and uses a grappling hook. Yes, a grappling hook to scale up to Monsieur Corall's office, goes in and murders him and makes it look like a suicide. Then he's going to climb back down, take the lift, go home, and voila, perfect crime. Almost from the beginning, things start to go wrong. First, the murder goes swimmingly. He kills Monsieur Coralla, he puts the gun into his hand, he's wearing gloves, he's removed all evidence, he's climbing back down the rope, and the phone in his office begins to ring because the secretary wants to know what's the holdup. It's Saturday night, I want to go home. The security guard's like, we need to lock up, I gotta get out of here. So they call his office and he rushes to answer the phone. But of course, as he does so, what does he do?
Je le connais, le capitaine.
Bien, monsieur Tavernier. Excusez-moi, il arrive.
Forgets the rope hanging on the balcony. Then he leaves the building, goes down the elevator with the two of them. They go outside, he hops into his car, he looks up. He realizes he's left the grappling hook and the rope hanging from the balcony. The evidence, the perfect crime has already gone awry. He's supposed to be running to meet Florence, and they're going to meet that night, and it's implied throughout the film that this is what they do. They meet at night on the streets of Paris, and there are cafes and bars that they go to where they're known, and that's what's supposed to happen tonight, only tonight is a night of freedom because they're no longer burdened by their boss/husband. And yet there's this grappling hook. He has to go back into the building. He doesn't want to be seen. The security guard is still in there. He goes up, and while he's in the elevator going up to his office, so Julien is trapped in the elevator, which is where he will spend most of the film. So you have your star, your protagonist, even if he's kind of an anti-hero and having just committed murder, trapped in an elevator, the elevator to the gallows, trapped in an elevator for the majority of the film. And this could be done in a lot of ways. It could be very boring, but it actually adds to the tension of the film because of what happens outside. Now, all of this happens in the first 5 minutes of the film, so this is not big spoilers of the twists to come. This is the setup, and two things result from this. First, Florence is going to walk the streets of Paris in some of the most famous scenes of late 50s French cinema throughout the film, looking for Julien, asking people who she thinks know him, bartenders, people in cafes, other people that they've spent time with at night. Where's Julien? Do you know where Julien is? Have you seen Julien tonight? And she's becoming increasingly convinced throughout the film that he has abandoned her, he's run off, that he's with another woman, and that he has somehow taken advantage of her. So one part of this film, which is a kind of crackerjack crime thriller, is also a film about heartbreak or potential heartbreak. And that's one of the things that gives it an edge that's so nice, is that it's not just the crime part, the creamy, the thriller part. It's also this ode to the Parisian night and ode to the heartbreak of Parisian night. The second thing that happens, which is the first sort of kind of coincidence or twist, comes when Julien sees the rope hanging from the balcony and decides to go back into the building and get it. What he does is leave his car running. His car is parked illegally, as we're let to know, outside of a florist's. And in that florist works Veronique. Julienne is known to her. She waves to him. She's seen him before. She says he parks here all the time. He doesn't care if it's illegal. He's so cool. Look at his convertible. This car is amazing. And that she's saying all of these things to her boyfriend, Louis. Louis is a kind of precursor, I think, to Belmondo's character in Breathless. He's sort of a street punk. He's got his kind of James Dean, Marlon Brando kind of leather jacket, poofed up pompadour hair. And he's just too cool for everything. He's too cool for Julienne. He's too cool almost for Dominique. He's just like, nothing rattles him. And he does what he wants, when he wants, wherever he wants. So he's part of this kind of 50s, I think Hollywood inspired, but not Hollywood alone, rebel characters, right? And I would say not only does he prefigure Belmondo, that the two of them in their concern throughout the film about how they're going to be treated in the press as their crimes become better known. There's also a little bit of Bonnie and Clyde in there as well, a bit, but you can see how Arthur Penn might have, very famously influenced by the French New Wave for Bonnie and Clyde, might have been at least in part influenced by this film. Because what Louis is going to do, obviously, is steal Julienne's car and bring Dominique with him. They're going to travel in the car, they're going to drive outside of town, and as they go throughout the night, they are going to claim that Louis is Julienne Tavernier. As they commit a series of crimes, those crimes are attached to Julienne's name. Julienne's going to remain in the elevator the whole time, but outside in the outside world, crimes are being committed in his name, which he has nothing to do with, but he does have to do with the murdered guy upstairs. And it's actually while they're driving away out of Paris that Florence sees the car. She doesn't see the driver, but she does see Dominique leaning out the window, which is why she believes as she's walking the streets that night that perhaps Julienne has abandoned her for another woman. These three storylines are interwoven here, and it's the way the editing, the filming, the cutting back and forth between the three that really adds to the film's growing tension, because we as an audience know what's going on the whole time. We know that Julienne hasn't abandoned Florence. We know that Julienne doesn't kill the people that Louis kills later. We know that he has killed Carlotta upstairs. We know all of this stuff. So what makes it tense for us is, are any of those people going to get out of any of this? Are any of these people going to get any resolution? Are any of them going to get away with it? Or are they going to get caught and punished for their many crimes? A lot of what this film is about is the atmosphere. And it's hard to imagine the film's presentation of its atmosphere being as successful as it is without the contribution of the soundtrack by Miles Davis. This is one of the early films to feature a fully jazz soundtrack composed specifically for the film. And it's just fantastic, and it's integral to the film's mood. It's integral to the film's kind of presentation of Paris and the Paris sort of outskirts of Paris at night. And it's integral to the film's examination, I think, of loneliness, of being alone, that feeling of being alone, whether one is lonely or not. It's a real sort of evocation of, I don't know, the singular. And it's a fantastic album. You can buy the Miles Davis soundtrack. It's presented as kind of a Miles Davis album, and you should. It's one of the best late night albums that's ever been recorded. And Louis Malle was a fan of Miles Davis, and he wanted to work with Davis somehow, and he invited him to do the soundtrack. And Miles Davis was like, okay. He didn't really want to do it at first, but Malle showed him the film. They watched the film a couple times. Miles Davis didn't have his band, the people that he was used to, but he got together a group of French musicians, including the great pianist René Outreger. And they went in and they watched the film after they'd seen it a couple times. And Davis, they sort of improvised and performed the score while watching the film. And it's a magnificent conveyance of the film's atmosphere and mood. I mentioned that the film is a sort of progenitor of the French New Wave, and it is so for a lot of reasons. I mean, the New Wave is just about to happen. We're about to get the 400 Blows and Breathless in the next couple of years, and French scholars would argue probably that, you know, films by Varda and Melville and this film by Malle and others were progenitors or precursors to the New Wave anyway. But there's some cool stuff going on in this film that's just worth talking about, including the opening sequence when they're talking on the telephone. Let's just have a quick look at that.
C'est moi qui n'en peux plus. Je t'aime. Je t'aime. Alors il faut bien. Je t'aime. Je ne te quitterai pas, Julien. Tu sais que je serai là, avec toi.
Oh, je t'aime. Si je n'entendais pas ta voix, je serais perdu dans un pays de silence.
Ce n'est pas très courageux.
Mais ce n'est pas courageux, l'amour.
Et toi?
This is a lovely moment to me of sort of non-continuity. It looks like they're in different places or they're being shot from different angles that don't kind of respect the 30-degree rule. And they're doing this while they're having what appears to be a continuous conversation. So it creates a sort of disjointed feeling of connection, but also something's not right. And I think in a lot of ways, visually, this opening phone conversation establishes the theme of the film. This feeling that as much as Julienne and Florence want to meet, they can't. You know, technical, coincidental, and practical reasons are keeping them apart. Much like that opening phone conversation, they are connecting, but it's also disjointed. It reminds me a lot of the famous car scene from Breathless when Belmondo and Jean Seberg are driving around Paris and he's talking about c'est là, the woman with him and how she doesn't understand him, and we have these jump cuts. You know, and that film's going to come 1.5 years or 2 years later, and I will return to that scene in a near future video. But in this case, what I love about it is not just that it's non-classical cinema, but that it's kind of declaring the film's intentions from the opening credits. Another great shot that I really love is when Florence goes into a tabac. There's a pinball machine, which is very cool. And it's a long take, and it's quite simple, but it seems like the cameraman must sort of step up onto the bar as it follows her around and shoots her from above. And there's nothing like incredibly sort of dynamic or extraordinary about the shot. It's just an interesting choice, I think. And it's another way to film Moreau and to capture different aspects of her expressions and personality, which in a lot of ways this film becomes an exercise in how many different ways can we film Jeanne Moreau, from above, from straight on, from below, in profile, to show off her incredibly beautiful and expressive face as she descends into the sort of deepening loneliness of this night wandering the streets of Paris. And just another one quickly that I really love is the interrogation scene. So eventually, Julien gets out of the elevator. I'll let you watch and see how that happens. And the police, because of the activities of Dominique and Louis, the police are looking into Julien as the perpetrator of these other crimes. And so they round him up. And I just love the way that this is filmed with basically the invisible background and just the three characters lit up. And this is another one that's done mostly in one take. So it's a fantastic performance because it's very naturalist. It doesn't have a kind of showy theatrical sort of look at us act. There's a little bit of that, but it's mostly done very naturally. And what makes it pop is the absence of any mise en scène. It's really sort of wonderfully composed and wonderfully performed and wonderfully shot. I mentioned that the film has political undertones, and like a lot of French sort of cultural output in the 50s, there's a heightened awareness here of what France was doing. France is still in Vietnam at this point, French Indochina, or Indochine as they call it in the film. France is still involved in Algeria. So there's a sense, and French intellectuals, French writers are engaging with this, right? We're after the Second World War, we're after France has been invaded and kind of taken over by Nazi Germany. And there's a conundrum amongst the French people and French intellectuals and French artists, I'm overly simplifying here, that how can we have lived through that occupation 10, 15 years ago and now be involved with the occupation of other countries? So there's this kind of conundrum. The French people are wanting to rebuild the nation, wanting to, put forth a new France, a new idea of France, to rediscover, not to put sort of too much of an American spin on it, but a kind of pride in Frenchness. And yet at the same time, they still have these lingering colonialist enterprises going on, which by that point, people are aware of atrocities, resistances, and so on. The film is not about that, but the film is aware of that. And it announces this early in a lovely, dark, cynical scene. And this is when Julien goes into Corolla's office to commit the murder. And before he does so, they have this conversation.
Alors c'est quoi, Tavernier? Quoi, de l'argent? Je n'ai pas peur de vous, Tavernier. On me déteste assez pour que j'en ai l'habitude. Et puis je ne vous crois pas courageux. À la guerre, oui, mais pas pour les choses importantes.
Vous osez vous moquer des guerres. Mais vous en vivez. L'Indochine vous a rapporté combien de milliards? Et l'Algérie maintenant? Respectez les guerres, monsieur Carala. Ce sont vos propriétés de famille.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que ce revolver? Qui vous a donné mon revolver? Qui?
I left that last part in there because I love the implication that the film's not going to show the murder, but instead we get this pencil sharpener, which has been set up previously, and then we cut back and it's done. But it's that conversation about sort of war profiteering and the real world, and that war itself is maybe not even the real world. That war is necessary, that profiteering off war is necessary, and this is what the real world is. And there's a dark, dark cynicism in there. And if you're watching, you're like, yeah, Corolla is one of the problems with the world. Maybe he should be, oh, now you're cheering. Now you're cheering for murder. And it's one of the dark things that the film does. And I love how throughout the film, as the police get involved slowly, and as the police start looking for Tavernier, and they realize that he's kind of has this special forces war background, that there's no deference to that. I think, especially for kind of American audiences and people watching American films of the last 20 years, kind of post 9/11, there's this whole kind of thank you for your service implication that anyone who joins the military or serves in the military is somehow doing something noble. I don't need to go on a rant about that, but I find that sort of, I find deference to that idea highly questionable. And one of the things I like about this film is that that deference doesn't exist. The police don't care. They're not impressed by his war background, by his special forces background. He's just another guy who might have committed a crime, and they're not going to kind of bro up to him for being some sort of hero like the security guard in the building wants to do. If he's the man, they're going to get their man, and they don't care what his service was. And I think in that also there's a kind of, not derision, but definitely a kind of light shown on the role that France is playing in its colonialist endeavors in Indochina and Algeria and elsewhere. And it's a light that's meant to highlight the darkness or the even kind of let's just leave it there for now. The darkness of those interventions, those continued interventions. So the film is not like war is bad. The film is not like French colonialism is bad. The film is just aware that there is something cynical about the new France presenting itself as a bastion of democracy while also taking part in these endeavors. And it's enough for the film to make those comments 2 or 3 times throughout without having to get up on a soapbox and preach about it. In preparing for this video, I've read quite a few reviews about the film, and it doesn't have the best reviews. There's a lot of, you get a lot of comments like, I like what it's doing, but it's more important for its atmosphere and for its sort of evocation of a time than it is a good film. I think it's a great film, or I wouldn't be doing it in this series. But there are also some comments that I mentioned at the top about, oh, that would never happen. And so I thought I'd just like point to a couple of those. One is he would never use a grappling hook to climb up. Today, probably not. There's CCTV everywhere. There's more people on the streets, I think. More people look up. There's more high rises. There's office buildings across the street. Probably that wouldn't be part of his perfect plan. But he's aware, and you know, for the purposes of the film, he's like, this is my shot, so he does it. More problematic, but it's a scene that I love, and it doesn't make sense, but I'm glad it's in there, is that when he sees the rope, he goes back in, he leaves the car running, which is, you know, how Louis and Dominique can get away with it. And he gets trapped in the elevator, and all he wants to do is get the rope. And then we get this short little scene. Look, it's illogical. Unless some massive gust of wind came, that's a proper grappling hook over a proper bar. Actually, there's some continuity issues in there, whether it's the second or third bar, but those things don't bother me so much. But I mean, the wind would have to kind of blow it down and then blow it up and over. There's very little way that the rope could fall, but I love what the fallen rope means about the film, and I love the little girl finding it and walking away with it, because part of what this film is about is like the pointlessness of all of these endeavors, and him going back into the building and getting trapped in the elevator is in its own way a pointless action because the rope's going to be blown down anyway. Another one that I see a lot of comment on, and I wouldn't normally bring something up like this, but I think it's interesting, is when Florence goes to the florist and she has found out somehow that Dominique is likely implicated in the stealing of the car. And this is later in the film, and now she wants to find Dominique to find out what's going on. So she goes to the florist, and Dominique's not there, of course. Dominique and Louis have returned to Paris after their kind of crime spree, and they're in her apartment. Florence doesn't know this yet. We know this. And what goes on there is fascinating. I'm not going to get into it, but it's a very interesting part of the film. But Florence is looking to her. She goes to the floor, and we get this short scene.
Madame, vous désirez en aller?
Votre petite vendeuse n'est pas là?
Véronique, le dimanche, vous pensez son amoureux, le cinéma, le dancing. Que madame regarde celui-ci.
Elle s'appelle
il est
Véronique.
superbe.
Où habite-t-elle?
Oh, quelque chose comme une petite chambre de bonne dans le 15e. Elle n'a pas fait une bêtise, au
Où
moins.
exactement?
Boulevard de Grenelle, je crois. 55.
And a lot of people watch that and go, that's completely unrealistic. That florist would never give out Dominique's address. Yeah, she would. She would totally give out her address. We've had, what is it now, 60, 70 years of, you know, security breaches, tightening paranoia about invasions of privacy and so on. But, you know, there used to be phone books with people's names and addresses in them. And we could have had a scene where Florence is like, I don't know how to find Dominique. What's her last name? Does Dominique work here? Oh, you mean Dominique? I don't know if we ever get her name. And she looks in the phone book and finds her address anyway. It was not hard to get this information, and this moment is completely in keeping with the time and what that woman would have done when someone like Florence, with her attitude and her obvious class difference and all those sorts of things, or even if it wasn't her, walks in and says, where does Dominique live? Of course she's going to tell her. And so most of what people find, I wouldn't even say problematic, but unbelievable about the film's twists and coincidences are a question of historical context, and most of them would totally happen. Most of this film could have happened. The grappling hook, not so much, but you know what? I'm glad it did, because it adds to the film, even if you're like, how would that happen? The resulting sort of deepening of the film's themes, I think, is worth it. So your mileage may vary, but that's my take. This is a crackerjack little film. It's a tight, really well constructed, 3 strands of narrative all pulled together. It comes together great in the end. Everything makes sense. And when I say thing, you know, that people are like, oh, that doesn't make sense, it has no effect on your understanding of the plot. This is a very straightforward, simple film to watch. It's thrilling, it's beautifully acted. Jeanne Moreau is an example of luminescence on screen in the way she's filmed, the way she performs, the way she delivers her dialogue. It's just a star-making performance, and you can see that, and it's worth watching just for that. It's worth watching for Miles Davis' amazing soundtrack, and it's worth watching if you like tightly structured, you know, meticulously deployed crime thrillers, because that's what it is, and it nails it. That's all for now, everybody. Thanks for watching. As usual, if you've made it this far, please hit the like, please hit the subscribe, and please share this video with your friends who love French cinema, or crime cinema, or any cinema. I'll be back soon with an early film of Agnes Varda as we continue this series on French Spring. This is Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I'm Aaron Hunter, and until next time, keep watching movies.